Hey, I'm Jordan Gray, and this is the Intentional Life video series. From sex, relationships, communication, and character development, to health, creativity, and self-love, the Intentional Life is your go-to source for powerful, actionable advice from amazing, world-changing people. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Intentional Life video series. I'm your host, as always, Jordan Gray, episode 6 now, I believe. And today, I'm super stoked to have Ruby Fremon on the call. Ruby, good to have you.
So excited to be here.
So there's a bit of context. Ruby Fremon, she's a self-love coach. I'd say that's the most dense way to say it. I've been looking forward to this call for multiple reasons, because I don't even know if you know this, and I'd say maybe 8% of my followers would know this, but my first ever business was I was a wedding photographer / part-time club photographer from 17 to 20, 21. And so I think more than any guest that I've had so far, I've seen Ruby more in person and online without ever having had any piece of a real conversation with her, because I knew you. So Ruby and I don't know if you were born and raised in Vancouver. I think you are.
Yeah.
So Ruby and I are both from my hometown of Vancouver, BC, Canada. And, she was like, our clubbing years barely overlapped. Like, we were a little bit displaced when we were going out, but like, I totally knew you as one of like the clubbing it girls. and I think like Andrea and Paige and like those people with Blueprint, and you guys kind of overlapped somewhat, but the fact that we're both now like running our own thriving like relationship or self-love businesses years later, I think is so funny, because we hopped on a call 6 minutes ago, and I was like, I think this is the first time we've ever said actual words to each other.
Yeah. Wow. So you saw me more.
Yeah.
But you never said a thing.
No, because I think I knew that. Yeah, I'm not sure like if it was I was finishing clubbing as you were starting or in the middle, but like there was some like barely overlap, but slight age gap, and I was also like club photographer and didn't interact with that many people. I would just like go to the front and just like beeline it in. Exactly. And you'd be there with like the clipboard doing your thing. So it's different for me like knowing this much about someone from that phase of their life and the current one. Right. So long story short, I'm stoked to be on this call. So talk about that transition, because I know that you're fairly public about how, in those years, as with many people that spend an ample amount of time in nightclubs, not everything was right in your world. And, talk about that transition from who you were, X number of years ago to now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big jump. Mm-hmm. And I was one of the top promoters in the city, and in a city like Vancouver, it's a big city for Canada. Mm-hmm. And it was just a really different lifestyle. It was very fast paced. It was very glamorous. And for the first time in my life, I really and honestly, truly felt accepted and popular. And prior to that, I never had experienced that before. Not in high school, not in elementary school. I'd never felt that sort of level of popularity. So that was part of the reason why I got sucked in. And
there was a tribe that seemed to love you.
Yeah, seemed to love me. That's the key, right? Mm-hmm. And so for the first time in my life, I was experiencing this level of like popularity and glamour, and I would hang out with, some of the world's best DJs, and it was just awesome. And those were honestly some of the best years, but also the worst years of my life, because I wasn't in a good space mentally to be able to cope with everything that was going on. And for me, it was very difficult to be around that type of energy all the time and to work those hours, because the hours were really long for me and really late. And that was when I got into drugs, and that was when my drinking problem also amplified. But I hadn't touched drugs until the age of about 27. So I started late, and once I got a taste, I was just hooked right in, and it became a coping mechanism for me to do the work that I was doing, and it also just became part of the glamour. And I didn't, now I can look back and say, wow, I was an addict. But in the moment, and even a year after I got sober, I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that it was an issue because everyone around me was doing it. So I thought, well, this is just part of the game, this is just part of who I am. But it really wasn't. And it was those years that I was dating someone else in the nightlife industry, and the relationship was very toxic, and it was one of the most difficult, if it was the most difficult relationship I've ever been in. All of my relationships have been toxic, but that one was like the universe.
Next level.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, are you listening yet?
Yeah. It's like, you're not learning your lesson, so here you go. And so that was really tough. And the ending of that relationship 4.5 years later was what got me to my final rock bottom, or the last rock bottom I've experienced in my life up until this point.
And was there a major turning point or milestone? Like, was there a morning that you woke up extra hungover, you're like, this is it, like, this is the no more point? Or was it just like a series of months that you were like, I'm kind of over it?
Yeah, I think that there's this misconception about, you just have this major epiphany. For me, it was a series of events. Like, I remember one in particular, it was after the breakup had happened and after I had hit rock bottom and felt like crap and started incorporating good habits in my life, yet I was still holding on to the toxic habits. And I had just pulled an all-nighter, which went into an all-day. And I remember being on this boat, and I had been partying all night, and it was 4 p.m. the next day, and I was really feeling incredibly awful about myself. I ended up jumping off the boat and finding my way home and laying in bed like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why I keep doing this. And all these missed messages on my phone from friends that I was supposed to meet up with. I was just letting people down. I was letting myself down. That was one moment. And then there was another moment where I really, I went from a yoga, got home, got ready, then went out and pulled another all-nighter, and I thought, what am I doing? Like, I'm just undoing the good that I'm now doing in my life. The final moment was, and I write about this in my story on my website, is I experienced a concussion, and I had been off drugs for a while, and then I went back on, and I was at after hours, and I just remember standing there and all of a sudden feeling faint, and the next minute waking up to flashlights in my face, and I had fallen somehow head first on concrete so hard that the music in the club turned off, and my entire body felt like it had shattered into like a million tiny pieces. And I lay there and I thought, okay, there's this light in my face. Am I dead? Am I paralyzed? I didn't know because I couldn't move my body. Eventually I got up, didn't want to go to the hospital because I was high, and I thought, I just don't want people to know this is what I'm doing. Friends took me home. I ended up with a concussion, which prolonged into post-concussion syndrome, which is when you have a concussion symptoms for a really long time, which also gave me manic depression. So my depression now went into a manic state, which meant I couldn't finish a sentence without crying uncontrollably. And I didn't understand what was going on. I was very confused and delirious. And, my work actually put me on a leave because I couldn't cope. And I ended up with nerve damage in my brain. That's a big deal. And I was put on nerve medication, and I remember because of the nerve medication, I couldn't do drugs and I couldn't drink. So it almost forced me to get sober, and I was on it for a month. And that for me was like, okay, this was the universe literally knocking me down and making sure I learned my lesson. So it was like a series of events that led up to that concussion, which led to like me really understanding the severity of where I was at and that things really need to change. Yeah.
That is some potent stuff.
Yeah.
That is a strong wake-up call. I know that Gay and Katie Hendricks talk about this a lot, about the concept of, when you're in the habit of listening to your heart's messages, your intuition's messages from the universe, God, whatever you want to label it as, it doesn't have to be loud. It can be like a little, like being tickled by a feather, like, oh, like maybe this is a thing.
Right.
Whereas when you're not listening, those messages often come in the form of a sledgehammer that they have to like, hey, we're going to wake you up because this is really overdue and you've gotten really good at ignoring these. So I guess we have to be that much louder for you. And, I love one thing that you said in the story about you jumping off the boat of like, why am I doing this? I don't even want to be doing this. I think that there's a very healthy, kind of concept creep with the idea of addiction right now, whereas most people think that, an addiction of anything has to be, oh, you're, doing heroin and your life is extremely unmanageable and out of control. And I think that, much closer on the continuum of what you expressed, I think addiction is anything that is that kind of like, I don't want to be doing this and yet I still find myself doing it. And that can be as, seemingly small or insignificant as shopping when you're depressed, or binge eating instead of feeling whatever emotion is there to be felt. Like, it doesn't have to be such a massive, overwhelming macro level thing. Right. I think it really is just as simple as like, I don't want to be doing this and yet my body or mind still like lead me to doing this thing that I know feels very out of integrity and shitty for me.
Like it has control over you.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's definitely a cycle it's easy to get stuck in. So you had this series of massive turning points, especially the concussion at the end. Was it a fairly quick turnaround, like from the concussion onwards? Was it like, I know this relationship is bad for me, I don't want to be in nightlife? Like, was it within a month we kind of like severing ties, or was that still a multi-month process of like letting go progressively?
Yeah, it was a series of detoxing events. So like when I hit rock bottom, it was April 2012. And when I got my concussion, it was December 2012. So between April and December, I was making shifts and letting go of people, but not doing it fast enough, which is why the concussion sped things up. So in January, while I was on medication, not working, locked up in my apartment with the curtains closed because I couldn't even face daylight, I started making massive changes, and I just let go of people that I knew were condoning, like the behavior that I was doing. I didn't want to hang out with people who did the things that I really just didn't want to do, because I needed to surround myself with different people. And I started just committing to, okay, I'm going to go to yoga, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm not going to go to the clubs. And I was still working in nightlife for another few months afterwards, and the nightlife gig didn't really end until probably about 6 months later. But also during that time, what happened is I started dating my now husband. And
Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin. And the beautiful part about that is he came into my life when I hit rock bottom. We met on Twitter.
Twitter, not Tinder.
Twitter.
All right.
Twitter. I won a tweet contest through his company. And, he expressed interest in me back then. And I looked at him and I was like, wow, here's this really good looking guy from Los Angeles who has his own startup, who's successful, who wants something to do with me. God, what does he want in me? Like, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't grasp it. And so
all the toxic shame being like, you're not enough. He's up here and you're down here.
Yeah. And so I pushed him away, and he was persistent. And when I started healing from my concussion, that's when he said, okay, is this a good time? And
now?
I felt like, there's a reason that he's come into my life, and there was something so familiar about his energy that I said yes. And so our relationship also helped just further integrate what the universe was trying to tell me, is that there's this whole other life for you, and it's right here. And it's been here this whole time, yet you've just chosen to look this way. And so that relationship really helped me push forward, but also just the trauma that I experienced from the concussion and the realizations that I was making, I didn't want to do that anymore. I was so tired of it, and I wanted to just give it another shot.
I'm so glad that you brought up all of that, because this is something that I'm like crazy passionate about, is this idea, and I'm writing an article about it right now that I don't think will be out by the time this video is out, so this will be a bit of a preview for my audience, that I think there's such a shitty, toxic, limiting belief culturally that we have around how, self-love is only a solo mission, that it has to be done through exclusively your efforts, and especially to meet and attract a high quality, super aligned partner, you have to get up to your 100% ceiling of self-love only by your efforts. And, while that is absolutely an important part of it by my self-love philosophy, and for a lot of people that have seen my episode 1 with Ken Page, this mirrors those sentiments precisely, that, we absolutely do need other people to reflect back our worth and value to ourselves. And that's not codependent. Like we're a relational social species, and that's not a bad thing. It's not something to be shunned. And I know that, that like the part of the social narrative that I'm not a fan of, some people could hear that and be like, oh, so you like just latch onto a new partner and like they gave you your self-worth. It's like, it's not that at all. Like, we really learn about ourselves and our core gifts through our relationships, like through those mirrors of people, and that's fine and healthy and totally acceptable.
Yeah, I think the key with that is, because I always say all love begins with self-love, because you have to say yes to it first.
Exactly.
Right? So he wouldn't still be with me if I was still in victim mode and
Totally.
still blaming other people in my, circumstances. He wouldn't have stayed with me.
Yeah. If you were hell-bent on saying, I definitely don't deserve you, we can't talk at all, then okay, you're a person of free will, and then you didn't meet in a different world.
Exactly. But I said yes to me, and then I said yes to him, and then I just continued on my healing journey independently, and also just started growing together with him as a unit. And it just worked. But if I didn't continue to do me throughout that relationship, even today, it just wouldn't work. And that's the beauty of this journey, is like, it's forever. You don't just get to 100% maximum capacity of self-love.
Yeah.
Like, don't. And there's no end where everything is perfection and every day is happy. Like, that's not what it is. It's every single day you challenge yourself to get to know you better. You challenge yourself to nurture you better. You challenge yourself to understand your needs better. And that's what this journey is about.
So I'm curious, there's a huge thread of, this is maybe an assumption, but a huge thread of self-acceptance, that when you have such a tumultuous journey, there's like this idea of like fragmented self, that like, well, there was that version of me and this version of me, and what does the process look like, either in your journey or what you lead your clients through, and how do we own all those pieces of, this is in my past, and this is part of my past, and this is all in me. I'm sure there's some things that feel stickier or more tricky to be like, yeah, and this thing, which again is like, the old toxic shame or limiting beliefs or low self-esteem that's trying to keep those parts away from us or away from people hearing about them, because then they'll leave me, then they'll abandon me. Like, what did that integration process look like for you, and what do you do with clients through that?
I honestly, in my philosophy and what I teach, I believe that taking ownership is number one for self-love. Mm-hmm. You have to own your shit. You have to be willing to look at every aspect of yourself, every piece of yourself, every chapter of your life, and say, I own this. And for me, a lot of that was ugly. I had to own a lot of ugly parts of me. But I take full ownership, and when you do so, it's empowering, right? Like, the moment you take ownership is the moment you gain back your power. So I've shared everything with my husband. I've shared every ugly truth, and he has loved me for it and accepted me. And it's not even like loving your imperfections. It's not about imperfections or perfection. Fuck that. Like, I hate... Those
are arbitrary labels that have nothing to do with anything.
It. Like, it's just human being. Yeah. Like, we're just humans being in this life. That's all it is. We will make mistakes. Mm-hmm. We will fuck up. We will do things that bring us shame, and that's okay, as long as you take that information and learn from it, apply it to your life, collect the tools along the way, and become stronger. So in my eyes, I don't see it all as fragmented. I just see it all as a part of me. Mm-hmm. And it's all brought me to where I stand today. So how could I hold on to feelings of shame or guilt? Because I love what my life has become. And it's become this because of that.
Right. Yeah. One of my most shared articles of last year is called What the Most Compassionate People All Have in Common. And spoiler alert, the answer is basically they've all been through a ton of shit. Like, you've been dragged through mud, and like, it's that whole, it takes heat and pressure to make a diamond thing. Like, you really, and this is, I'm like tangenting like crazy right now with my brain, but this is the same reason that so many children of like the super wealthy, they kind of are born into a huge disadvantage, in that if you are born into like a very safe, overly safe situation where you don't really have to go through much shit and you're like overly protected, it really does make for not like soft character, but just, you don't really have that heat and pressure to make you into the person you are. And yeah, every person that I know that just has this aura of like, there's very easy acceptance and like they're amazing listeners and they can be brought anything by a friend or client or their lover. And like the fact that they're able to accept it exclusively comes from the fact that they have, walked through the fire, come back out and been like, I get it. I understand suffering and it's okay. Like whatever you're going through, you're a human and that's fine.
Yeah. Zero judgment because we've been there.
Yeah.
That's it. And I always say like, it's not even about the story because we all have a story. I feel as though all of our stories may be different, but we all are here to learn the same lessons because whoever you talk to, we all learn the same shit in a different capacity.
Yeah.
And it's not about trying to say my story's worse than yours. It's not about that at all. It's just these are just our stories and the things that weave us into who we are. And, my upbringing was phenomenal. I have great parents who gave me everything. Mm-hmm. I just took a little bit of what my parents would tell me and I amplified it into something totally different. And that was my own inner shit. Mm-hmm. And so that's often what happens is we take like these little comments said to us as we were children and it snowballs into something giant because we don't deal with it at a young age. We just start to cover it up.
Yeah, 100%. And, that's really stuff that, like that exact thing is what I've been unpacking over the last year and a half as I've been in the most like emotionally honest and transformative relationship of my entire life, which I can't say this because my article will be out by the time this comes out, actually just ended 2 days ago. And so I'm in a really emotionally heavy place right now. And even a part of me was like, man, I should like maybe cancel this interview. Maybe I should like postpone it a week until like my eyes look less like they've been crying constantly. And I was like, but that's where I'm at right now, and that's what's honest. That if I'm doing an interview about self-love, then like, what better way to walk the walk than come on the call?
Right.
But yeah, absolutely. That I had that same childhood thing where like I have like ridiculously amazing parents. Like they've been together for 35 years. They're crazy loving. They're good people. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that that analogy of like child rearing being like your parents are like handling you in your piece of glass. Like no matter what they do, they're going to leave their finger marks on you, and whether it's from them or your siblings or from peers, like. Young children are egocentric and the entire world revolves around them. So if their parents fight or if their sibling or parents has like one or two potentially negative comments, you go, oh, that's about me. And then you hold on to that for decades. It can totally wreak havoc.
Yeah.
And I was actually working with a client a couple of days ago who is working on building up a similar brand to mine. He's like, I like what you do and I want to do that. Like, let's talk. And he's like, how do you put out so much content? And I was like, well, I put out a bit less now comparatively, but I was like, yes, writing is really easy for me and fun for me. But a part of that, especially in the first 2 years of building my brand, when I was writing like crazy, like unsustainable, high-paced volumes of content, a lot of that intention was rooted in my lack of self-worth of like, I have to prove myself constantly and put out so much stuff to like make up for how unworthy I feel. And so I was like, I can give you all the tips, tricks, and tactics that you want, but unless you're like navigating some of the like old toxic shame, like rooted beliefs that I am, like that's part of the secret sauce that I was operating on. But people only see the highlight reel and the external. So, but yeah, it's that same thing. It's like you can't blame your parents or siblings or early childhood experiences for the mess without also being like, well, like, and I'm going to also blame them for the positive of they made me this person. They made me, I can hold space for my husband that much better when he's in the shit, or I can like really be there for a client when they're hurting because I'm like, I get it. And I think that's I think it's Latin that like the root words of compassion is like with fire, meaning that person is like walked into the fire, it burned away all the parts of them that weren't true, weren't authentic. They came back out to tell the tale, and then at that point they can take someone else's hand and be like, I'll walk with you into the fire. I've been there and it's safe and you'll come out alive. Yeah. And like, fuck, like that's so potent and real. And like, that's, I don't know, I think you can always feel that depth of experience of, oh, this person's really lived. This person's suffered. They've gone through the fire. And, usually people over 2025, you're like, I can feel your life experience just dripping off of you. And I don't know, like we recognize our own kind very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. We do.
So I'm curious, at what stage in people's journeys do you usually attract clients? Like, are they people that are like in their, equivalent of nightclub phase, or are they somewhat coming out, or are they already well out of it and they're looking to like optimize? Like, who do you largely work with?
I work largely with people who have just ended the victim relationship and are in that place of like, oh shit, I think I had a part in this.
They're starting to take responsibility, but it's still tough and scary.
Yeah, and they don't know what to do with that epiphany. So that's who I work with, and that's who's naturally drawn to me. I think I do get a lot of hate messages from people who are in victim mode. I've actually received quite a few this week, but that's just part of that game, and I understand it, and I can only show compassion because I've been there.
Yeah.
And I get, like, to watch my videos, I get from that point of view when you're in that deep, dark place where life really sucks. It's tough to hear someone like me speak about it, like, well, you can just fucking do this, because when I was there, it was tough, but that's the reason why I don't work with them, is because when you're in that state of mind, you're not coachable. Plus, you don't want the help.
Yeah.
Like,
you want to be right.
You want to be right. You want people to feel bad for you. You want to say your story to the world and repeat it over and over and over again until you feel validated, but you will never feel validated until you validate yourself. And that's the issue. And so I work with people who are just beginning to take ownership, people who are coming out of the victim mentality, people who realize that they have the potential to create change. They just don't know how to do it. And that's why they seek out the service of a coach.
Right. So yeah, when they're in victim mode and they're like, I don't believe in me, they want to only surround themselves with people that will validate that and go, you're right, I don't believe in you either. But if they even have a sliver of, okay, maybe I believe in me, then they're ready for someone else to be like, I also believe in you. They're like, really? Okay, cool.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful moment in your life, and surrounding yourself with the right people and the right support is so imperative to your growth. Like, it really is, because the people that you hold closest to you can either, you can let them destroy you, or you can let them help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's amazing that people with public brands are such easy, perfect, mirrors to project shit onto. That I'm sure someone that's like deeply in pain could be like, well, if you're super self-loving, then why are you wearing makeup? Like, why are you shouldn't you just be like accepting to the nth degree and be flawless in everything ever?
Right.
Which is like, probably the equivalent of people that see me and go, okay, well, you're a relationship coach, why aren't you married? Why should we believe anything you say? And it's like, at any point we're both going to be human, and like just because I'm not married at this point in my journey, or just because you're having like a shit day sometimes and your self-love isn't flawless, which in either case isn't the point.
Right.
But yeah, like it's so easy to see that from the victim mindset and be like, well, you're not flawless, and if I can't work with you and be flawless, then I'm just going to stay stuck in the mud for a bit longer.
Yeah, or like, it's so easy for you to say that because you haven't been through what I've been through, or you're not going through and I'm just like, oh, I can't.
We've been through the same thing, even if it's a different thing. Like, whether you were cheated on, or whether you're an addict, or whether everything happened to you simultaneously, it's like, pain's pain, and it's all relative.
It's all relative. I mean, I had just said to someone this week, if I were to share my entire life story, there would be a ton of wounds that people would see, but that's not what I'm about. I'm not here to prove myself.
Right.
I'm done with my story. I'm done with that. Like, that's a past chapter. If you ask me questions about it, I'll answer, but I don't feel a need to have to get it out like I did in the past, like.
They aren't like these trophies that you have to always have on display of like, I promise I suffered.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So are there any kind of like overarching blanket things that people should generally remove from their lives and or add to their lives to be more self-loving? Like, are there common blocks and common boosters for self-love?
Yeah, I mean, the people you hold closest to you, that's so important. And I feel like that's also one of the hardest steps, because when you're in that place of wanting to make change, it's tough to put yourself in a position where you are going to be a little lonelier than normal. and
to let go of the toxic people.
Yeah, and that when you let go of the toxic people, you are lonely because you're going through this whole transition of people, and you may not even, for some, they may not even have the good people in their life. They may not have one, you know? And so it's like, where do you begin? But you have to let go of that stuff in order to make room for something else, and in order to give you space to heal through whatever's going on in your mind and in your heart. You can't have the chatter around you. And so to remove those people, and if you have good people in your life, bring them closer. Just bring them in. And then also incorporating good habits. So usually when you're in this state of low self-worth or a lack of self-love, you most definitely will have a ton of toxic habits, because when you're in that state of I'm not worthy, you're going to do things that validate your low self-worth. So you're going to, numb out in front of Netflix for like 8 hours at a time. You're going to go out partying. You're going to drink your face off. You're going to do drugs. You're going to get into like toxic relationships. You're going to have bad habits. So what I always like to say is incorporate some good habits first, because letting go of the bad, that's really tough. There's this, our brains don't listen to the word stop. When we hear stop, we tend to keep going. That's just the way our brains are wired. So if you just start implementing some good things like eating healthier, things like going to the gym, things like doing things that amplify the good in you, you're going to naturally not want to do the other things anymore. Eventually, there will be a shift.
It'll like drive that wedge, even if it's like 100% toxic or unproductive before. Then it's like, okay, well, let's just like, that's fine. Let's just like try 5% healthy, and then that wedge of love kind of starts to like take over the rest of the pie chart.
Exactly, and it's just so much easier when you have the right people around you too. Yeah,
because I think again, coming back to the original point of you meeting Kevin or having these kind of shining lights of people, like I think that it's easier and generally like more true to have those impartial, objective people to be like, no, like I see you and you are this, and like they can be that stronger support system than we can be for ourselves, especially in that early kind of like cocoon phase when we're letting go of other people and bringing those other people closer. That in itself is an act of courage of saying to yourself, God, the universe, that you're like, I'm voting for me, and I'm saying I am worthy of a friend who's this nice to me. Because that can even be terrifying for someone that's been so entrenched in their story or victim mindset or unhealthy habits, is like saying, okay, fine, if these friends were fast food, then I'm allowed to have these green smoothie equivalent friends that are nutrient dense and good for me.
Yeah.
And, that in itself is a huge act of courage to say, like, I'm voting for me now.
Yeah. I love that you said that it is an act of courage, and I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about it, because I remember that moment in letting go of all these toxic friends. It was like 85% of the people I had around me, 85%, because that was my world.
That's terrifying.
And it's terrifying. And the little 15% that I had left, they didn't even know what was going on. So for me, I remember there was a night where I called them over and we talked, and I told them about my drug problem, and I was so ashamed. And even then, I didn't look at it as a problem. I just said, I want to stop, and I don't know why I keep doing this. I felt so ashamed in that moment, and they just received me with love.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I really felt accepted, and I was like, this is what I need, and it's courageous to open up, and it's terrifying to open up about something that you've been holding inside you like a shadow. Mm-hmm. But that's the first step. We need support. We're human beings. We don't do things alone. We work as a society. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and that in itself is like, there's so much deeply embedded courage in that act, because everything in ego is, trying to grasp onto every ounce of fear that it can find. And so by you, sitting in a circle of people that are the healthier friends and saying, here's my shit, like all of ego, all of toxic shame, all these old limiting beliefs are saying like, don't you dare say this. Like you're totally messing with the status quo. The only possible outcome is all these people will go, oh God, and like be so freaked out that, when you're really vulnerable and honest with them for the first time, the greatest fear is that they will be as mean to us as we've already been mean to ourselves for those months or years of living in our own stories. And, as the brilliant ongoing work of Brene Brown constantly points out, it's like, when, what is like vulnerability is the deep access point for intimacy, something like that, the more truthful we are, the more open we are, sure, it might repel, some of the like 20% of people that aren't meant to be in our lives anyways, but the people that know you and have already seen your heart, whether they have huge roles in your life today or not, will all go, okay, that's part of your story. Great, we still love you. We still see your heart. We still know who you really are. And not only do we believe the vision of where you're going, but to us it seems completely obvious and inevitable. Like they can be your biggest cheerleaders through that process. Again, when you've had that courage to choose yourself and say, here's me really, I'm suffering, here's the stuff that I need to let out there. And I think that that's one of the most powerful kind of tangential benefits that has come from in my personal journey, from like having written 350 articles and like 8 books, like really putting a lot of stuff out there that, people that have been following me for years, they can really piece together my entire life story and all of the most like shameful, difficult, challenging times of my entire life. And I think at a certain point when, and you talk about this constantly in Instagram videos and a lot of content you put out, that when you've really owned your entire story, there's kind of a, I don't want to sound like perfectionistic, but there's kind of like a bulletproof feeling of like, I can't be called on anything. Like I've already faced all of my shadows. And again, not that it's like 100%, that it's done, because there isn't a done with self-care or self-love.
Right.
But yeah, it's that like, that feeling of peace that just bleeds into your life when you're like, okay, like I know who I am and I accept everything that has made me, and all those difficult things have now, transmutated into the most beautiful parts of my soul and who I am as a person.
Yeah, it's like no one can say anything to me and I would feel bad about it because I've already faced those demons. I remember when I first got into this and I just started blogging about my journey.
That's tough.
And my dad was like, do you really need to put all this out?
Yeah. It's going to be on the internet. It's going to be there forever. I got a lot of that from my grandparents.
He couldn't grasp it, and he grew up listening to like the Bob Proctor, and he has all those development books on his nightstand. But those, people don't talk as much about their stories. And it was a completely different generation. And I remember trying to tell him, like, this generation and the generations to come, we thrive on vulnerability and authenticity. And this is how we connect. And he just couldn't see it. And he was like, well, you're just going to do what you're going to do, so I'm not going to say anything anymore. And then eventually it became, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. And he doesn't necessarily say it that way, but he'll put little hearts on my posts on Facebook, and he'll, do things like that that make me realize, like, now he sees it. So the message in that is like, not everyone has to understand this journey that you're on. And I think that's so important for people, because as human beings, we often feel a need to be understood, but we're not going to be understood. We're not by everyone.
Either ever or right away by all people.
Either ever or right away. And just do you. Just do you, and focus on you, and focus on growing, and focus on being the best possible person you can be, and having that deep, loving relationship with yourself. And everything else will eventually fall into place, and the people that aren't meant to be will fall away, and that's okay. We could do a whole 2-day seminar, me and you. I feel like we should just announce it right now. Like, Jordan and Ruby are going on tour with this self-love seminar.
I was just going to say, there's half a dozen things in just that 1 minute share that I was like, oh, I want to unpack that, and I'm resisting taking notes because I want to be present with each sentence. But oh yeah, 1,000%. And yeah, it's ridiculous. But totally, I had that exact same pushback, not only early days, but kind of throughout. And I loved, again, coming back to the Brene Brown vulnerability stuff, there's this, even for me, 2, maybe 3 years into it, but definitely, 2 years into writing and putting a lot of stuff out there, it's funny, every time I was about to put out a post that was very extra revealing, there's always some of me in every post,
right.
But every, let's say every 20 or 30 posts, I'd put out another one that's here's another really big chunk of my story that was one of those extra vulnerable, scary things. without fail, every single time that like my finger was literally shaking over hitting the publish button and my thoughts and ego were like on this overdrive of
Yeah.
this is gonna ruin you, like this will like kill your business. People will be like, whoa, he's like really human, like too human. Like every time that I thought that I'd put out a post that would like ruin my business, those were, like every single time, those are the ones that were like the biggest leaps in engagement and like new coaching clients and people reaching out being like just, thank you for putting out this free resource. Just you writing it has made me accept like another 70% of myself. Yeah. And it's always those scariest things. Again, whether you're doing it in front of a circle of your new trusted friends or putting out a blog post to 1 million people who you might not meet most of them throughout your entire life. When ego's really holding tightly to this is like the worst thing you can do, this is terrible, and you can feel that you're only spinning around in your head, like if you can even have a 1% break from that and go, hey, I know there's like a lot of huge fear and anxiety right now, but I wonder what my body's saying, I wonder what my heart's saying, and if there's any feeling of like, I know that this will help me, and if this helps one other person in the entire world or in the room that I'm speaking with, like it's always worth it. And that is definitely somewhat of a generational shift that my parents said similar things. Parents and grandparents said similar things to what it sounds like your dad said, where it's like, are you sure that isn't too much? And I totally get it. You're their offspring. They want you to be safe and not homeless and on the street. And they're speaking from their generational conditioning, which they're like baby boomers. They're post-war babies that were like, they're closer to the stiff upper lip, work hard side of the spectrum. And it is a totally new thing to be like, hey, make the world group therapy and just spill your darkest secrets on the internet. Like that's totally not part of their generational paradigm. But right. Yeah, after them, seeing you do it a dozen times and seeing all the people that are engaging on your Instagram posts or Facebook posts, and they're like, oh, okay, like that is brave. And then that also helps them be more authentic and vulnerable in their lives and their relationships.
Exactly. And vulnerability is bravery. That's what it is. Yeah. And I mean, I had the extra added pressure of my culture. So I'm 100% East Indian. I'm Punjabi, I'm Sikh. I was raised Sikh. A lot of people don't know that now because of my beautiful new last name, but I am, and I was raised in that culture, and I wasn't even allowed to date growing up. I wasn't allowed to date, and I wasn't allowed to hang out with boys. And here I am talking about, drugs and alcohol and like my fucked up relationships and all this stuff.
And saying fuck in podcast interviews that will be on the internet for decades.
Yeah, and it's like, but if I can help people, even one person, that's what it's about. And especially for people who are raised in conservative cultures such as mine, talk about your problems, because our culture taught us to not talk. We weren't allowed to talk about our problems. And this is why so many kids who have this sort of an upbringing tend to go like this way, because you don't feel safe to talk about what it is. So you hold it all inside and you just start fucking up and not talking about it, and you feel shamed and guilty, and you carry that weight with you, and it just amplifies and snowballs, and it's horrible. But I want to break that status. I want to break that, because there's too many people who are brought up that way, and your issues don't need to be carried on your shoulders. Like the weight of that can be shared, because when you share, you can heal, and you can find people that are going through the same thing. I mean, my parents would say things to me like, why can't you be like so-and-so's kids? And I would say back to them, I saw so-and-so's kids at the club that night, and they were doing the same stuff but it's, and that's the thing, is so many of us are raised in cultures where there's just a really heightened level of shame. And at some point you have to be willing to just drop that cloak and say, this is who I am. Because in order to grow and in order to transform and shift and heal and love yourself, you need to drop the shame, and you need to be willing to look at everything you've done and say, I own this.
It's like that Matrix red pill, blue pill moment of like, I'm going to opt out of this story because it was passed on to me and I don't know if I really agree with it anymore, and it's exhausting. And one of my favorite quotes that is from all like the 12-step traditions with like AA and NA and SAA for addicts is, you're only as sick as your secrets. And it's so true. Like, whether that secret is as, micro or macro as like, I'm in law school because my parents want me to be and I'm miserable, or I do coke every day to get through the workday, or, I know that I'm with the wrong partner and I'm holding both of us back. Like, whatever the thing is, the more that we're like, that our mind tries to just like keep stomping down on that heart or gut level truth, it's gonna just wreak havoc in every possible way. I forget, this is a slight paraphrase, but there's a Paulo Coelho quote, the guy who wrote The Alchemist, that's like something along the lines of stress, anxiety, and depression are byproducts of living exclusively for others.
Yes.
And that every day that we're swallowing our truth, like it'll like, those secrets will find a way to like fuck up our shit on every level. Where like we won't be emotionally available to our partners, we'll be a grumpy friend, we'll have panic attacks, we'll have these increasingly loud messages that are being forced up to us by our hearts.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I always say anxiety is also a sign of misalignment. It's
Totally.
like anxiety happens, your body starts to go into this, your nervous system starts to shake and shake out your entire body because your energy, all of it wants to do this one thing, but you're either holding yourself back or trying to force yourself somewhere else. Yeah. And that's why you get anxiety.
Yeah, anxiety is, someone else we both know, Emily Obey, talks about how, anxiety is your body saying no when your mouth hasn't been.
Right.
Like it's totally a misalignment thing.
Yeah.
To zoom out a bit, because I know that you've touched on both, do you think that self-love and the act of being self-loving and cultivating self-love in ourselves, is it more about our thoughts or actions, or are those kind of intrinsically intertwined no matter how we rationalize them?
I always compare it to a relationship you would have with anyone else. Because right now, self-love is a buzzword. And that's why I don't even write self-love coach on my website anymore, because people look at that and like, oh, she's going to teach me how to meditate and go to yoga and do these things.
Right.
And get my nails done. It's like, I don't even do my nails, by the way. But it's what do you do when you first get to know someone?
You ask them questions, you get to know them, you're curious.
Yeah. And we don't do that with ourselves. If you ask someone even the question of what is it that you want in a relationship, they're going to list out everything they don't want because they don't spend time even thinking about what it is that they do want. If you ask them what they want in their career, they're going to list everything they don't want. And usually they're living it. But they don't list what it is that they want because we don't take the time to understand that. And then sometimes we think we know what we want, but that's just what society has told us what we want, or our parents have told us what we want, or our school teachers have told us that we want.
Their secondhand beliefs, secondhand desires.
And so self-love to me is that deep loving relationship with self. It's how well you know yourself. It's to what degree do you tend to your needs? What are you doing for you? Do you even understand what your values are? I believe so strongly in the value system, and I teach that to all my clients is because we have an internal belief, like internal values, and sometimes those values are different than what our parents thought, put upon us.
Frequently.
You have to understand what those things are because that's your core essence. And if you're doing things that don't align with those values, why are you doing them? And so it's about shedding light onto who you truly are. It's about understanding what you need and being able to give yourself what you need without feeling bad about it.
I love it. One of the first things that came to mind when you were talking about, how to have a relationship with anyone else. I remember meeting this woman at a conference. I don't go to many conferences, but for some reason this one called out to me. I'm an introvert and I get so overstimulated so quickly that usually multi-day events are like, super overwhelming. There's this woman who came out to me and she was like, it just seemed like a super, like, exaggeratedly outgoing extrovert. And she was like, hey, what are you passionate about? And I was like, this and this, and I really care about this, and like pushing these kinds of messages in the world. And I could like feel her like anxious energy and like wanting to like just dive into me. And like before she could get the next question in, I was like, what about you? Like, what lights you up? And the look on her face kind of like betrayed this look of, she'd gone around and like asked 20 people what they were passionate about because that was like her go-to intro to a conversation. Right. But it looked like no one had put it back to her. She was like this like terrified deer in the headlights look of like it looked like she hadn't asked herself that. Like she was just like, Um, you know, like it just like it was such a clearly
Yeah.
confronting question that I was like, yeah, that was what my first thought came up. There, it's like, yeah, like you know, what a simple thing that is an easy way to really get to the essence of someone or get to their core values. But you know, how often do we sit with ourselves for 3 minutes, whether you're journaling or talking to a friend or meditating, going, what am I passionate about? What makes me feel light? What's exciting to me right now? Whether it's a thing that's currently in your life that you can, you know, make move from the groundswell and have it be a bigger thing, or what has my heart been telling me that I've been wanting to do for a while but I haven't? Like
Yeah.
there's a couple times I've kind of gone off into a cabin, like into the forest, and basically been like, I'm in like just writing a book mode, and I'll just be like heads down and doing that. And I've posted about it, and people are like, oh, it's amazing. I wish I could do that. I wish I could have the time for blah blah. Or like, I wish I had the like money to go and just write. And I'm like, well, if you go and write a book, like, wouldn't that be like another revenue generating thing? It's like you can like make the money by listening to your heart, by listening to your
Yes.
intuition, instead of just living in your head and living in the yeah, but I don't have money, or yeah, but I don't
Right.
deserve this, or yeah, but someone told me I was stupid when I was 4 years old, and I'm really holding on to that. So who am I to write a book? Like,
Right.
you know, there's so many. Again, our head just like being so tight and stomping down our intuition. It's like you're allowed to do the things that make you happy, whether that's
Yes.
being with an amazing man who expresses interest in you or doing work that lights you up. It's like you're allowed. You're
Yes.
allowed to follow your bliss in any context.
Yes. Exactly. Oh.
So yeah, apparently Ruby and Jordan will be traveling North America doing self-love
Yeah,
workshops.
like how can we fit all our time's already coming up? Haven't even fit everything in yet.
Not even
But
close.
yeah, to be continued, everyone, at our upcoming tour.
Exactly. This is a part one of a multi-format conversation.
This is the preview.
This is yeah, just like the trailer to the ongoing film. Um, yeah, okay. I'm gonna link to everything about you in the show notes. I am rude.by.
Are you?
IAMRU.by.
Yeah.
So clever. That was so bad. When I
Yeah.
first saw it, I was like, nice. That's a thing. That's amazing.
I made it a thing.
Oh, really? You're like, I'm creating a new .com for my name. Are there any other like major like do you have like different hubs or like that's the main foundation?
My
People can find
website
you.
is the main hub, but for anyone who really wants to seek to connect with me on a more personal level and seek support, I have a Facebook group, a private Facebook group called the Selflove Tribe. So if you search for the Selflove Tribe, and I'm sure Jordan will share the links to that, it's open to men and women, and it's just a place that is highly supportive and will accept you just as you are. And it's just a beautiful, supportive tribe, and I absolutely love it.
Is it like people sharing their wins of like, hey, I like did this for myself or I had this reframe recently or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and then I have prompts every day, so I spark up conversation, real conversation, because I'm trying to get people to, everyone in the tribe, as a member of that tribe, you just agreed to be authentic and raw. So I have prompts to get people to get raw in front of that tribe, and it's just been so beautiful to see the transformations that take place just from that.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yes, again, I will link to everything and then some in the show notes. Ruby, it was so awesome to have you and connect for the real first time face to
Yeah.
face. It's been super fun.
Outside the nightclubs.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jordan.
My pleasure.